shuffling the digital desktop, nonstop, looking, pulling, culling, organizing, and we've got a great batch of news up right now. Much more coming tonight. Look, everyone's entitled to go to a cosmetic surgeon. That's fine. It's up to you. If you haven't seen yet the story about Kamala Harris, I would urge all of you to, if you're thinking about cosmetic surgery, you need to look at the story. The woman has destroyed her appearance. She looks like a gargoyle. Look, politics is telegenics. You got to look good. She looked good. She had a nice appearance. A little classy. I'm not saying her politics were classy. She looked good. She's a nice-looking person. My God, when you see what she's done to herself, I don't know. I don't know. A forehead lift, a brow lift, a facelift, both sides pulled back toward the ear, enormous dimples or high cheekbone implants. Her chin has been augmented. She looks like, I don't know what she looks like. She does not look like Kamala Harris anymore. It is truly bizarre. I've got pictures up, going up very shortly in the second splash art position at the top of the homepage. It's sad to see what, I don't understand people. She's a nice-looking woman for a politician. Look at the rest of them. And look what she's done. I don't know. It's pretty amazing to me. Clearly, her cosmetic surgeon is either blind or in awe of her and just did what she wanted. I don't get it. It's a weird thing. I'm really always want to talk about telegenics. That's really what it's all about. You got to look good. Well, she looked fine. There's no reason for it. But then we're expecting competent intellectual processes from our political leaders. Here's a perfect example of it. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has done a 180 now, and he is begging Americans to wear masks and warning everyone what we have been saying here for months, that the virus is completely out of control and is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. So maybe Donald was listening to the program, or somebody was listening to Dr. Niman and made him sit down and listen. He's finally, after, let's play the game, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, 7 months, he has failed to look at this situation honestly. Finally did. All right, another real quickie here. That Lincoln Project, there's four or five people involved with it. They're Trump haters, all right? They've got a new 30-second commercial out now. Actually, it's about 60. It's predicated on Seinfeld. They put a laugh track, and they've edited the terrible interview that was presented with Chris Wallace. Trump just, I don't know what his problem is. He's not mentally deranged or senile like Biden, but he's got some real problems in terms of being able to coherently string logical and intelligent factual data together extemporaneously. It's not working. They're going to have to keep him on the prompter. All right, we'll talk more about this later. First up tonight, and this is a very interesting anniversary today. We want to get rid of political leaders here. Usually we go to the polls and get rid of them that way. Sometimes, like John Kennedy, and others, the powers that be, kill them. They kill people all the time. The same thing happened to Adolf Hitler in Germany in World War II. Most people don't know that, but we're going to take a little walk back in history this first hour with the brilliant researcher Frank Joseph, who is back with us tonight. Hello, Frank. Welcome back. This is you mentioned it's an anniversary. It's not an anniversary people would necessarily celebrate, especially on this side of the pond, but it is nonetheless an anniversary date in history that could have changed a lot of things. Tell us more. Welcome back.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. It's always great to be here. I enjoy your program very much, like many people do around the world.
Thank you.
You're right. It's not an anniversary that I don't think anybody would celebrate. The anniversary was actually yesterday, July 20th. And on that day, 76 years ago, 1944, there was a bomb plot against Hitler that very closely came to killing him, that very came close to succeeding. And I always knew about it, but wasn't not all that interested in it. I was putting together a book called World War II Turning Points, and somehow I strayed into the assassination attempt on his life. And I found out that was a turning point also. And it was a major turning point not only of World War II, but of modern history. And it changed the way our world is today. It's hard to imagine, but the consequences of that event really remade the world. We would not, the post-war world and what we are today would not be the same. It changed quite differently. I can touch on some of that. Just very basically, what happened was there was a plot, a conspiracy on the part of German generals to kill Hitler, and they had their lead man there was Count Graf von Stauffenberg, and he smuggled in a briefcase to Hitler's headquarters, which was called the Wolf's Lair on the Eastern Front, or close to the Eastern Front, and the bomb exploded. It was a very powerful plastic explosive, killed several people that were in the room, and the reason it spared Hitler was because at the last moment, someone inadvertently moved the briefcase behind a very heavy wooden leg of the table.
Yeah, it was very thick table legs on that big bank, or, well, was that like a boardroom table?
Yeah, everything in the headquarters was reinforced and made very heavy materials. And so when the bomb went off, it knocked Hitler down and injured him, but not all that seriously. And but did kill these other men. And then the conspirators were almost immediately apprehended afterwards, and there was a kind of a show trial that went on. Hitler was against that trial, by the way. He thought that there was no... Yes, he was against the trial.
What did he propose in its place?
What he proposed in his place was, of course, the conspirators should all be arrested and held until after the end of the war. He wanted the whole thing put on hold.
Interesting.
And he thought that the best thing was just to get on the radio. It was the first thing he did, and tell everybody he was okay, and that he felt he had been spared in order to continue the leadership of the war. And let's get on with it, And so he wanted to put everything over to the end of the war.
What an interesting thing. I didn't know that. Most people would think, that monster, he would want them all executed in the most agonizing way possible.
No, as a matter of fact, he gave direct orders to General Fromm, F-R-O-M-M, who was out. He rounded up a number of the people that were involved in the assassination attempt. He had them shot immediately. And Hitler had to send Otto Skorzeny, who was a very famous guy that had rescued Mussolini the year before, to stop this killing. And I just want these men arrested and held, and we're just going to keep them until after the end of the war, and then we'll have an investigation. But this is the wrong time for that. The reason it got away from Hitler was because there was a lot of outrage at the time, and it was felt that they should be put on trial, and the trial was kind of a farce, I have to admit. the prosecuting attorney was also the judge. It was pretty ridiculous, and it just didn't work out too well, But Hitler was right there, but he just wanted to get on with the war.
Now,
in any case, I thought, all right, these things happen.
Hold your thought.
Oh,
hold your
go
thought.
ahead.
I want to just do a little bit more here. This is interesting. 3 months after his birthday, on the same day, the 20th, this attempt to kill him, July 20, 1944, failed because somebody moved the briefcase on the other side of this very thick table leg. This is a remarkable thing. Maybe you've got this scheduled for later on in the hour, but I want to talk about what you think might have happened in July of 44 if the assassination had been successful. We'll get to that, I'm sure, later. But
no, we can address that now. That's fine. I don't have any agenda.
It's all very interesting. In other words, is it early enough before the end of the war to have successfully sued for peace, or is it too late?
It was completely, utterly impossible to sue for peace because the Allies had agreed on unconditional surrender. Well, no civilized nation would ever... unconditional surrender means you just lay down your arms and allow the enemy, who has been fighting you for so many years, to come in and do whatever they want.
Right.
Now, that is complete. There's no nation in the world that would ever accept that.
No,
and if the German government had accepted that, the German people would not have accepted that. You would have had civil war. The thing about that was that's a whole thing we can get into. The idea of unconditional surrender was launched by Henry Morgenthau, who was the Secretary of State in the United States, and he, along with Nathan Kaufman, who wrote a book called Germany Must Perish, were determined that the German people and Germany should be eradicated. We hear about the extermination attempt.
These are international... excuse me. I want everyone to know this. I'm speaking for me, not for Frank. These are international Zionists, Bolsheviks. Understand that. They were in the administration here in Washington, D.C. They're the ones who called for the eradication of Germany and its people. Understand who was pulling the strings here. Communists. This is communism. That's what it was. Go ahead.
They did not want peace. The Roosevelt administration in general, and certainly not Morgenthau or Nathan Kaufman, who wrote this hideous book. It's called Germany Must Perish. It was a bestseller. It came out half a year before the United States got involved in World War II. And this book tells how you should exterminate the German people. Call for the extermination of the German people. I don't mince words with it. It does openly. And when it was reviewed by Time magazine, that's kind of publicity you got. Time magazine had a rather lighthearted view of it, like, oh, well, maybe it's just kind of a joke and so on, but it has some good ideas. That's just unbelievable. We always hear about the 6 million of the Holocaust and so forth, but we never hear about this, which was this call for exterminating the German people. And Morgenthau got the book. He thought it was a great idea. And by them demanding unconditional surrender, that meant that they were condemning other Americans to death, because if you have a negotiated peace, then you can come to a peace. And Germany, Hitler often said that they just leave us no choice. And the German government, Hitler himself, was constantly putting out feelers to the Western allies, not to Stalin, because you can't deal with a psychopath, but to the Americans and the British. The German government was constantly putting out feelers from, I think early 44, late 43, to have some kind of a negotiation. They said, you can't, because if we continue this war, your people are going to die too. Let's come to some kind of an end. The Japanese had the exact same problem. They put out feelers beginning in December 1944 and January 1945, which were totally ignored by first FDR and then Truman. FDR and Truman are responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of Americans because the Japanese were trying to defend themselves while trying to negotiate. We would not negotiate with them. And that whole Pacific War is entirely on the heads of FDR and Truman. When the Japanese were willing to surrender, but we would not accept their surrender.
That whole, I want to repeat that.
Yeah.
What Frank said. The entire Pacific War, island hopping, all the rest of it, was completely unnecessary to defeat Japan. Completely. It was a total waste of men, human lives, indigenous peoples, Japanese soldiers. It was all about money. They made the equipment and they wanted to use it.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, to get back to this thing in Germany, if the Western Allies had even made very harsh terms to the Germans to have a negotiated surrender, the Germans would have definitely surrendered in 1944. I have no doubt about that. And I don't think any historians can really doubt. But because the Americans and the British and Anglo-Americans demanded that there be unconditional surrender, that meant that the war had to go on. The German generals were among the strangest group of human beings you can imagine anywhere. And the reason why, these are the people that were involved in the attempt to kill Hitler. The German general staff had ruled Germany since the time of Bismarck after 1870. Germany, in effect, was ruled by the military from 1870 to up to 1918. Well, they lost World War I. They lost the war. They were incompetent enough during World War I to have lost it. And they did. They did lose war. And that was something they never got over. And in the post-war period of the 1920s, when Germany was really up for grabs, it was an extremely chaotic time. The military always wanted to come back into power, but they couldn't politically. Then when Hitler came into power, Hitler created, believe it or not, a representative government. He was elected to power. He had a mandate to power. The people that were put into power were asked by the German people if they should be in power every few years through plebiscites that were governed by international commissions, so they were completely fair. The German people overwhelmingly supported their government. The German generals wanted nothing like that at all. They wanted to be able to regain their political power, and they always hated Hitler because he had only been a corporal in World War I. He was not part of the Prussian class. And they were...
even though he was decorated for heroism twice, I believe, in World War I.
That meant nothing to them at all because he was an outsider. And they were an extremely arrogant group of professionals. They had humiliated themselves by losing World War I. Their top guy, Moltke, in World War I, had lost his nerve and had lost the war when the Russians invaded eastern Germany. That's a whole other thing. Well, so the German generals always had terrific hatred for Hitler, especially personally, and certainly the National Socialists, because most of the National Socialists were war veterans, were common soldiers. They were not officers, most of them, and certainly not high-ranking officers. And this created, they referred them always as tin soldiers and so forth. And so they were deadly enemies of Hitler. They had tried to kill him on numerous occasions before the war. I don't want to go into all that.
6 times altogether. 6 times total. That's what
at
they said.
least, I would say at least. And they also killed a number of his closest associates who were about to tell him, or were trying to tell Hitler, that the German general staff is rotten to the core. You have to fire some of these people. And they were bumping these guys off, like General Dietl, who was the man who won the campaign in Norway, and other high-ranking people that weren't even National Socialists, but that were just loyal Germans. They were killed by these German generals. And so they wanted to bump off Hitler. That was the idea. Kill Hitler, mostly really out of hatred. They just hated him hideously, and they thought that, the war is being lost, so this is a good opportunity for us to kill him. The German people will applaud this because Germany's not doing well. Then we will set ourselves up. We'll be back in power, and we'll make an alliance with the Americans and the British, and we'll all become friends, and we'll go and fight the Soviet Union. That's just totally unrealistic lunacy to think that Roosevelt and Winston Churchill would have signed up with these Prussian militarists to fight Stalin. I mean, but they seriously believe that would happen. There were reports being made immediately after the assassination attempt that the overwhelming majority of German people, even those critics of Hitler, even those opposed to Hitler, thought that the assassination attempt was dishonorable, despicable, and could not have come at a worse time. But your question is excellent. What would have happened if it succeeded? Could they have killed Hitler? Absolutely. It was just sheer luck or destiny, however you want to put it, that the briefcase with the explosive inside was moved at the last moment, literally within minutes before it exploded. And it could have killed him. So they would have succeeded in that. But would they have succeeded in taking over? Never. Not a chance. The reason why was because there was so much dissension and personal, professional hatreds and jealousies amongst the German general staff themselves that would have never happened. And of course, the idea of them trying to take power would have resulted in terrific civil war. You would have had parts of the general staff fighting the regular German army. The country would have collapsed utterly.
Very good.
Would have utterly collapsed.
Hold on right there if you would. I have to take a little break. Please, all of you out there, listen to the commercials. I know they've been around for years. It's because they're accurate. Patronize the sponsors here for your own health and well-being. They're the best products. Be right back. And welcome back. Talking with Frank Joseph about history, which is rapidly being evaporated and deleted from that great server base, wherever it is. The cloud, the cloud. Go ahead, Frank.
Well, I've given a little background on what happened July 20th, 1944, and it was more of a turning point that I realized because literally from June 20th, 1942 onward, Germany was losing the war. From 1939, when the war started, September 1st, all the way until June 1942, Germany was unbeatable. Had won everywhere. It had hardly even any setbacks. It was really on the road to total victory. That all changed in June 1942. Why? The reason why was that at that time, at the end of June 1942, the British had finally cracked...
Enigma.
They had cracked the German codes. And the reason why they had done that was, for one thing, they had assassinated Reinhard Heydrich. Reinhard Heydrich was the fellow that was in charge of German security, the SD, and he was tracking down all of these leaks that were going out to the Allies, and he stopped most of them. And they realized what a total threat he was. They could never win the war so long as this guy was still around, so they
he was a great German
these guys and they assassinated.
Great.
So from
great
1940...
for them.
Yeah, from From 1942 on to 44, this period we're talking about, July 44, Germany was losing, just lost continuously, because there was this funneling of top information from the literally from Hitler's table all the way to the Allied commanders. They had all of his plans laid out before them long before he was able to implement them. But after the assassination attempt on him on July 20th, 1944, all that stopped almost overnight, so that this flowing of information from the top German command to the Allies was pinched off, because now there was this great alert on security, went all through Germany, and they tracked down all these leaks. And henceforward, Germany, although this was very late in the game, and Germany had been beaten really badly just about everywhere, but now Germany made a comeback, and you had things, military on the battlefield. And the big turning point was supposed to be the end of the war, late 1944. And that was something called Operation Market Garden. That is where the British launched the largest paratrooper drop in history. And it was a place called Arnhem, and it was close to the Dutch border. And this was to overwhelm the German forces in the north. And it would have succeeded, but the German plans to counter it did not leak out this time. The first time in 2 years that no major German plans leaked out. And so when the British came in, they were totally defeated by the SS, who were waiting for them, knew all about it. That was not the only victory. They had other victories after that. And a very close near miss, that was the Battle of the Bulge. When the Battle of the Bulge was launched, it came as a total surprise to the Allies, because their conduits of information had been lost after Hitler's assassination. There were other really splendid victories that Germans pulled off with negligible forces. Battle of Reichswald and places like that. They did really quite well. But it was too late to really change things. But it shows how history turns on the actions or the life of a single individual sometimes. If Reinhard Heydrich had not been killed in June 1942 rather, Germany would have inevitably won the war. There was nothing to have stopped her from doing that because of all the years before. And the same thing with Hitler. This near miss on him pinched off this flow of information. If Hitler had been killed, I don't believe that it would have been conceivably possible for the conspirators to have achieved power. That doesn't seem to have been in the cards for them at all.
Very interesting analysis. I had not heard that before. Very interesting.
And if Hitler had died, then Hermann Goering would have taken over, and Goering would have found himself in the same position Hitler was, where the Allies would have not been willing to talk with him, and they wanted this demand for unconditional surrender would have continued. So I think that even under Goering, things would have probably been much the same the way they turned out, because in a way, it didn't make any difference who was in control of Germany, because the Allies had this adamantine demand that they surrender without any possible negotiation, and things would have turned out the same. But I think the crux of this, to be learned historically, is that history does turn on the fates of individual men, and it certainly happened there. If the assassination had never taken place, then I think it's conceivable that Germany would have ended the war in late 1944. I don't think it's very possible that Germany would have surrendered by late 1944. The reason why is because the Allied decryption of all of these secret orders would have still continued on, and the British maybe, very possibly, would have won at Arnhem instead of being massacred as they were. And so the war would have ended sooner had that assassination not taken place.
How was it that we talk about all of this brilliant German science, 5 to 10 years ahead of everyone else in many areas, rocketry, jet engines, jet aircraft, you name it. And yet they couldn't figure out that they should change the damn cipher in the Enigma machines. routinely. Why did they just let it go? That's one of the biggest mysteries I've ever I cannot answer that one. I can't even guess.
Part of the answer for that was Admiral Dönitz, and that brings up, I think, it highlights exactly what you're talking about. Admiral Karl Dönitz was the Grand Admiral in charge of all of the submarine, the U-boat forces after 1943. And when he became the head of the German Navy, and even before that, when he was head of the U-boat arm, he did change the codes from time to time, and that really threw the British cryptographers for a loop. The German Army, we can answer that. Why the German Army did not change their encryption? Because many of them were very pro-British and were in contact with the British, like Admiral, he was an admiral, but he was in charge of German military intelligence. Imagine that. His name was Canaris, Wilhelm Canaris. And Wilhelm Canaris was the biggest traitor one could ever possibly imagine. He funneled this information directly to London. Now, he was the guy that was in charge of German military intelligence. So it were people like that and the German generals in the army that had no interest whatsoever in keeping things secret from the enemy. And the exact opposite did everything could to funnel it. Dönitz was not part of this clique, and as a consequence of him not maintaining the same codes all the time, the German U-boats were still succeeding. As a matter of fact, they reached the height of their success in May 1943, which was way after the German army had already been in decline, had lost Stalingrad and so on. So he was smart enough to do that. But that explains why they didn't change it, because they didn't want to change it. They wanted Germany to lose the war. Imagine that. The head of the German military intelligence actually told his fellow conspirators that a German defeat was preferable to a German victory, just so long as they got rid of Hitler. That's all that counted. So he wanted the loss of literally millions of his fellow countrymen really just to get rid of a political regime.
This was class-based, class warfare, if you will, on Hitler because he wasn't of nobility, Prussian nobility.
Correct. They couldn't stand the idea that this was a common laborer and a common soldier who didn't have any connections, and somebody, most of all, who they could not control. That was the big thing. If you look at the German general papers, even late in the 30s, they're always talking about how to control Hitler, and they're angry at him because he doesn't make for a very good puppet. That's what they wanted, and when they couldn't have it, they tried to kill him, and they did that all just so they could maintain their class status, and it's remarkable. And as a consequence, they lost their class status, they lost their country, they lost everything, but they were kind of hysterical. But if you study this interesting particular period in the past, you see how the slightest things, like moving the briefcase, that would have definitely killed him a few minutes earlier, or later rather. These things are the hinge pins of history. And I think that if you look closely at history, you find that all throughout our past. That people wonder, like, how could this have happened or that? Well, look at the individuals involved. There was a theory of history at one time that in order to understand the past, you must acquaint yourselves with the biographies of its leading individuals. That the more you understand about, for example, like Roosevelt, what made Roosevelt tick? Why did he do the things that he did? What were the psychological things involved? Then you can understand where the whole country went. And so history is nothing more than the understanding. The key to history is in the biographies of its leading individuals. That's the way it seems to me. And, but I think that the assassination attempt was something that was bound to fail from the point of view of its political success. There's no way that they could have taken power. That was something like the SS around, and also with the overwhelming majority of the American of the German people, which found the act repulsive and certainly
yes, understood. The Prussian nobility was one thing, but the SS was another. The German people knew full well how Hitler dragged them back from the abyss in the 30s, saved Germany from communism, Bolshevism, and pulled off one of the greatest economic turnarounds and miracles in recorded history. That's something you just can't ignore. That's a fact.
And that's why the German people supported the regime to the very end. Even today, you'll go on and so on, and people say, well, how is it that the German people continue to fight for the Nazis when everything was being lost and so on? Well, you have to look at it this way. What was Germany like in the 1920s? It was bankrupt. It was economically, culturally, morally, spiritually bankrupt. And in the matter of a short space of time, after the National Socialists came to power, like it or not, historically we know that the German economy rebounded. And it wasn't because he organized the military. That has turned out to be something completely wrong, because Hitler was actually concerned. He was afraid that if he did try to militarize Germany again, he would just antagonize Germany's old enemies, and he did not want a repeat of World War I. If anything, he and his followers were almost pacifists, because they had gone through World War I, had suffered horribly. He was blinded himself temporarily under excruciating circumstances. Many of his friends and comrades were mutilated. The German people themselves during World War I were starved to death by the blockade. Nobody wanted a repeat of that. So he rebuilt the German economy. By doing that, he caused World War II, because the economy that he built.
What did Churchill write in his own book, if he wrote it? He wrote, World War II had nothing to do with exterminating National Socialism. It was a war fought to destroy Germany and its people once and for all. That's pretty psychopathic.
Well, consider the source, you know.
Yeah.
So this explains why the German people fought so well and for so long, even when things were hopeless. And what kind of an alternative would you have to surrender to someone like the Bolsheviks? I mean, they went on a raping and murdering campaign.
Beyond belief. Read Hellstorm. If any of you doubt any of this, read Hellstorm, that book.
Yeah.
It'll make you cry. It's that bad. The horrors visited on those people, beyond belief. And that's communism. That's Bolshevism, okay?
Yeah, we have the same thing starting here. Of course, communism is nothing more than the organization of the lowest common denominator in human society, the scum of society, the lowest of the low.
And elevating that up to be the new median of the entire mass. That's supposedly
That's right. Yeah. And that same phenomena that was in Europe at that time is now working in this country. You have the Antifa and all these other groups. They're nothing more than, it's the same, exactly the same as took place in other parts of the world.
Same thing. That's right.
Yeah. But it's interesting that when Hitler was the victim of this assassination attempt, it had actually a good effect from the German point of view, like I said, militarily, because the cryptographers in Bletchley Park
stopped.
that reverse it. If the assassination attempt had taken place even a year earlier, Germany might have won the war. It's very possible, because then they would have been back to a level playing field. But you can't possibly win the war if your opponent knows everything you're going to do in advance. But that stopped. It drained off.
Same thing, a football game. You know every play that your opponent is going to run against you before they run it.
It doesn't. Then it makes no difference how skillful you are, or how many men you have, or any of that stuff at all. If you've got that kind of information, it's child's play, and that's exactly what the Allies had. And That's what explains Stalingrad, and everything else was because it was the same thing in the Pacific Theater as well. The Americans were successful in breaking two codes. First, the diplomatic code, the Japanese diplomatic code, which gave them all the information about Pearl Harbor long before that took place. And then they eventually broke the military codes, which enabled us to win the battle at Midway, which would have been completely impossible otherwise. We wouldn't have had a clue. Japanese intelligence, military intelligence, was zero. Virtually nothing. They just guessed. They didn't know what we were going to do. We knew everything they were going to do. So how could we possibly lose? And but then, after the assassination attempt on Hitler, well, that didn't work so well anymore. And the Battle of the Bulge was quite a surprise for Eisenhower and the rest of them, you know. So
if the Germans had won the Battle of the Bulge, it would have prolonged the agony. They were going to cut the Allies pretty much in half there and go into Belgium, I think, was the plan.
Well, you know, Jeff, it's a funny thing about that, too. I can't think of the book right offhand, and we haven't got that much time for it, but the unconditional surrender that was demanded by Morgenthau and Roosevelt and all the rest of it has to be, that did not sit well with American military commanders. And when the Battle of the Bulge got going, and the Americans and the British were shocked to see that a major offensive could still be unleashed by the Germans that late in the war, there was serious consideration that we're going to go to FDR, we're going to demand that this whole nonsense about unconditional surrender be terminated. We're going to tell them from a military point of view that we have to have we're going to win, we're going to be the victors, but we're going to have a negotiated peace. We're going to make our demands to Germany. They're not going to be easy, but the Germans will accept it. We'll win the war, because otherwise this thing's going to go on who knows how much longer, and it's killing a lot of people. I talked to veterans, American veterans of the war in France in 1944, and they told me things that I've never read in any book anywhere. And one of those things were that they would often see whole train loads of cars jammed with dead American bodies coming back from the front. It's not like just a few guys. Train load after train load. And these veterans, these U.S. veterans, Army veterans, told me they do not believe the statistics on the American dead. They say from that war, they said those statistics were monkeyed with. So we saw many, many more people that were killed. And that fits in with what I read about the American generals who were saying we have to have a negotiated peace with Germany. And it's going to be on our terms, to be sure, but this whole idea about an unconditional surrender is murderous. So we're still learning about that war.
Oh, so much lies to wade through. Huge amounts of lies. And we may never wade through them all. You're right.
We
the
won't.
veterans knew the story. They told the truth. Patton told the truth. Read General Patton. Read Patton's letters to his wife. Understand how the man thought. He knew. He understood who the enemy was. He got it. And they killed him for it.
They killed him for that. They were terrified that he would come back and run for the presidency.
That's right.
And if he did run for the presidency, he might have won. And that would have been something that would have put back the powers that be by quite a few pegs. So they had to kill him.
Yeah.
It's just like that line in The Godfather, you know, that it says that if history teaches us anything, it's that any man can be killed. And that's what the rulers of our world today think. Because they're psychopathic murderers, that's why.
Oh, yes. Yeah. They have no problem. They kill people all the time. And they're doing it now with technology that makes it impossible to understand easily a murder. You have to look at the circumstances and then ask yourself who benefits. Who benefits from that person's death? It's the only way to really understand. Everything's called suicide now. So you have to look at the circumstances.
Have you noticed that? Yeah.
Oh, yes.
He committed suicide.
Even if it's 2 gunshots to the head, it's still suicide. Talk about self-discipline. That's the ultimate, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, usually these people are shot multiple times in the back or things like that, you know. That's the old Soviet way. They would say, oh, well, this general, he just committed suicide, you know. He was so embarrassed. And they find like 5 bullet holes in his back, you know.